something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware.
Hi, and welcome to the 27th episode of Occupy TV. I'm here today with Gordon Lafer, and I practiced that beforehand and knew I was going to blow it. I'm thinking about Lafer curves and Ronald Reagan, and all that stuff. But we are going to talk about how to build a movement, and looking at how to be effective. And Gordon did run a workshop at Occupy a couple weeks back on a Sunday, and which I attended and found to be very interesting. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay. I'm a professor at the U of O in political science and in Labor Center, the Labor Education and Research Center. I have spent, I don't know what the number is, 25 years or so working in and out of the labor movement. So I've done a lot of work with union organizing and non-union workers organizing. And I've also done a lot of political work. In 2009 and 10, I was on leave working in the U.S. Congress in the Education and Labor Committee of the House of Representatives. So have looked at progressive change both around economic issues, both in terms of the political process and in terms of organizing on the ground in workplaces. So, and I, like many people, found the Occupy movement one of the most hopeful things in a long time.
It did sort of take the edge off the despair, didn't it?
It did, and I think that there was it touched millions and millions of people, I think, around the country who are basically not political, and both because of what it pointed to and because it felt like somebody was fighting back in a way that neither political party nor many nonprofits or think tanks or any of that are doing in a serious way.
Yeah, it sort of indicated to those of us who had been activists, over the years that it was time to start coming back out. I mean, I do remember I was very active when I got out of college. I was sort of tuned in a little bit in college, but afterwards, when I finally had a little bit of free time and wasn't working, trying to take a full class load and trying to figure out where my next meal was coming from. I got to be able to spend some time doing that. But then by the mid '80s, it had become clear that we had been seriously co-opted, shut down. That political activity within the country had kind of vanished. And so my experience during all of that was to go to these groups and say, are you going to get out and start interacting with other people? And they go, no. And it's like, come on, time to get out of the comfort zone a little bit. And they go, no. And it's like, okay, well, it's not bad enough yet, right? And so I did that for 2 decades. I guess, close to 3 decades now. And finally, it's okay. It's bad enough that people are now back out. So,
I think it's, I think it's not just things getting bad. I mean, unfortunately, I personally don't believe that the way change happens is things get bad enough and then people in some automatic way rebel or organize.
So what do you think happens?
I mean, not that I think there's a grandmaster formula, but I think it takes a combination of things being bad, of people believing that they deserve better, which people don't always, and a lot of people try to convince them that they don't deserve better, and of having some hope. I mean, not to co-opt Obama's word, right, and not to be Pollyannish about it. And I think that the occupation of Wall Street, without any clear plan, this is how it's going to go, felt like, okay, this is somebody's doing something. There's something to be part of, and it resonated so powerfully and so quickly that I think people, I wish this wasn't true, but there was feudalism for 600 years, and with the exception of revolts here and there, for the most part, everybody felt like this is normal, this is the way it is, the lords deserve to be the lords, we deserve to be the serfs, and nothing happened. So I think it takes more than just, things have been getting bad for the majority of people in America economically since sometime in the mid-1970s, late 1970s, depending on what measure you use. But basically, especially for people who don't have a college degree,
Yeah.
which is about 2/3 of Americans are in the economy where people don't have, and the jobs don't require a college degree. You had a college degree, wouldn't do you any good, right? That's not the kind of job you're in. For those 2/3, 3/4 of the country, things have been going down slowly but steadily for 40 years. I think for the people at the top who are pushing policies that are going to make that worse, that are going to make inequality worse and make living standards, the ability to have a place to live, to have health insurance, to have an education, all that stuff worse for the majority of people, the challenge for them is to think, how do we make things worse for most Americans without provoking a political backlash? And they're hard at work at that, and they're smart, and they have a lot of strategies.
Yeah. I think there's two items in there that I'd like to touch on. The first one is that just like in the feudal days, in the Middle Ages, part of the way that the ruling class is convincing us that this is how it should be is that it's in fact God's plan. And same rhetoric, Middle Ages, same rhetoric today. And the second thing is, I'm not sure that the issue is, the agents of the ruling class saying we're going to make it worse for working people, as opposed to we think we can extract more wealth from the society if we do these things, and the net result is that it gets worse for the working class. I think that there's that essentially it's greed that's driving it. Any thoughts on those two things?
Well, to take the second thing first, I think it's all the same. Where they say we think we want to lower the minimum wage because we want to pay less. We want to have less unions because we don't want to have to negotiate with our workers. We want to pay less taxes. We want to have crappier schools. Like the same, it's just the flip side of a coin to say we want to extract more, and that means everybody else having less.
Precisely.
And I don't think it's exactly God. The people are not being told, the guys on Wall Street are picked by God, but a secular version of that, which starts with calling people, or one element of is calling people job creators, who in fact many of whom are job destroyers, or laying people off by the thousands or tens of thousands, or just they got rich because they paid off politicians to make laws so they don't have to pay taxes. They hired lawyers so they don't pay any taxes, so they get rich, right? But the idea that everybody feels like if you're rich, somehow you deserve it. It means you're talented, it means you're smart, it means you're something, you're special. For most people, it's so far away, they can't even imagine exactly what it is, but it has the aura of you deserve it, right? And that's what they're trying to... And I think for us, every time things get worse, they want everybody else to feel like, okay, maybe 10 years ago I would have complained if I didn't have a good health insurance plan. And now, as long as I have a job, and I'm making enough to pay my rent, and I'm not sick right now, then I'm okay. Like if my kid is in school with 35 kids in a class, that's okay because the other kids have 50, right? And that you keep demanding less and less, both of corporations and of the government. I think that's part of what they want to encourage people to feel in order to not have people rebel, to feel like we don't deserve better.
Yeah, I think that it's a sense of the mythology, okay? And we have essentially the Powell letter, which is something that I've talked about repeatedly, which formed or began the sort of corporate resurgence where the people on the right said, okay, we got to put aside our differences, we have to raise staggering amounts of money, which means several $billion a year, and we are going to generate this message and we're going to push it out there. And the message includes a lot of pieces, but some of the dominant ones are social Darwinism. That rich people are rich because they're more evolved, they're more moral, they're more disciplined, they're better than you. And if you were like them, then you'd be rich too. So it's your fault that you're not. The whole stern father kind of thing again about discipline, and it's competitive out there, and you have to be tough, and all that kind of crap. And it all the impacts that has. If you believe in a stern father model and you have out of control parents who are alcoholics, drunk, rageaholics, nuts, can't resolve their own relationship, they're not going to be transferring strong values. I mean, there's more families like the Simpsons in the United States than there are like, the Cleavers in Leave It to Beaver. And so you have that kind of mythology coming out. But I guess the question that we have today, we've been talking about the problem a little bit. So how do we go about solving that? How do we go about organizing movements so that we can actually penetrate into that, that whole mindset far enough that we can change enough hearts and minds that we can actually win?
Well,
it's a tough one, isn't it?
I mean, if I had the grandmaster plan, I wouldn't have kept it a secret up to here. But I think that, I think what Occupy and some other things showed is that we're in a very volatile moment. I mean, I have spoken to plenty of people who will say things like, I hate the big banks, I hate corporations, I hate insurance executives, and I hate people on welfare, and I hate immigrants. A lot of people believe all kinds of. It's not like there's a law saying you can't believe contradictory things, right?
A lot of
people
hate
believe
in society.
Things. Yeah, a lot of resentment, and especially for people who are, who are having a harder and harder time. And it's kind of a question of which button gets pushed and which direction they go in. And I think that the Occupy movement scared the people at the top. And I remember seeing polling that even something like 20% of self-identified Tea Party members also supported Occupy, right? Because there's kind of right-wing populism. So the question of how to grow that and how to do something with it, I actually think is a particular kind of question for Occupy. Right? When you say how do you grow a movement, it depends a lot on what kind of movement are you trying to create. We didn't need Occupy just to have a critique of Wall Street or to say you shouldn't, log old growth forests, or all these different positions. All of that was already being said by plenty of people. It's not like what we needed was somebody to say this, or to talk to the press, or to write a good position paper, or even in some ways to be out doing demonstrations. I think, from my point of view, what galvanized so many people was direct and serious confrontation with the heart of power, with Wall Street, right? That says we're here. We're not going away. We're camping on your doorstep. I also think, from my point of view, the refusal to boil that down to, here's 3 policy demands, was part of what made it so powerful and part of what freaked out the people on Wall Street, because they know how to deal with policy demand. They know how to deal with a demand. Fine, you cut a deal, right, and you make it go away. Without a demand, I think was so powerful that was saying, if anything, we don't need to make the demand. You know better than us how you robbed the country. You know how to unwind it, and that's what you have to do. So, but I think that Occupy Wall Street, the Occupy movement was the promise of, direct, serious, nonviolent confrontation with the people in power, which is what made it different, right? So then you say, we want to grow that movement.
Yep.
Okay. So that means, to me, if you think in any place, whatever, and this is for everybody involved to make up goals, and this is part of what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but if you picked any goal that is not just about raising awareness, that is not just about educating people, that is not just about getting press coverage, but is, if you actually want to win something, whatever the goal is, if the goal was, we don't want to have any more home foreclosures in Eugene, if the goal was, everybody who's paying on an underwater mortgage should get their mortgage renegotiated to current values and current interest rates in Lane County. If the goal was, we want to find 500 or 1,000 housing units that are owned by banks and are not currently occupied and have them turned over to people who need housing. If we, any of those goals, or people could think of other goals, but that are really serious and really ambitious, I think those goals are not going to be won just by education. They're not going to be won just by voting. Not in the current situation where money is so powerful in voting. They're going to be won by nonviolent direct action and by a lot of it. If you had the goal of saying we want to stop home foreclosures in Eugene, there have been a number of cases of home foreclosures being stopped around the country, where hundreds of people got together and they sat on somebody's door and they said, we're not going to let the sheriff evict you, and Bank of America or whoever it was backed off because they figured the publicity was worse than letting it happen. That may happen for 1 or 2 cases. There's something like 7,000 people paying on underwater mortgages in Lane County right now. If some big group of people said, we want to stop all of those, we want to say moratorium on eviction and moratorium on paying on underwater mortgages, there would be, I'm sure there would be hundreds and hundreds of people arrested before you could win something like that. So if the question of movement building is that kind of movement, if the question is how can we get an additional 1,000 people in Eugene who are ready to be arrested in nonviolent direct action, confronting whoever it is that needs to be confronted? That's a very particular question. To me, that seems like that's the right question. But it's very different from saying, can we get 2,000 people out to protest the war in Iraq, or can we get 20 people to sit in front of to sit someplace doing something? So I think people have to be clear first, and the Occupy movement is a very broad, diverse, democratic, consensus model movement, right? So to say people need to decide, I don't even know how that happens. But if the decision of a critical mass of people is we want to do something like that, we want to do something that serious with a goal to actually win something, then you have to say, okay, if that's the goal, then the question is how to build a movement while retaining a commitment to that level of serious action, right? Because it's easy to build a weak movement, and it's easy to have a very small clique of people who are willing to do serious things. If you don't want to do either one of those, then you have a different kind of challenge.
But the issue that I look at, okay, the willingness to do civil disobedience, I don't think of and by itself is the goal, okay? The goal is to get enough people serious about the issue that if it came down to it, 1,000 people would be willing to do it, if you follow what I'm saying. In other words, you have to change the hearts and minds of a much broader segment of the population and activate them to the level that they say, hey, if it takes my putting my body in front of this, I'm going to do it. But it's not the generating 1,000 bodies who are willing to get arrested. It's doing all the other work on changing the system that's going to generate 1,000 bodies to do the work.
I'm not sure what the difference is between them. I mean, if you said today, let's go find 1,000 people who'd be willing to get arrested to stop home foreclosures in Eugene, I don't think you could find them.
You couldn't do it.
I'm not sure you could find 50. Maybe you could find 50. I don't know. So then the question is, okay, suppose today you could find 50 or you could find 100, and then you say, where are the other 900 going to come from?
Yep.
The other 900 are going to come from what you're talking about, people who are open to it, who are sympathetic, but who right now feel like, arrest, I'm not a criminal, I'm not a troublemaker, I'm not a loudmouth, that's not me, right? And this is the question in many, many movements. How do people go from being, if you think of the civil rights movements or labor movements or other movements where there have been some, maybe civil disobedience or going on strike, which takes as much courage and risk as civil disobedience, how do you get thousands of people to go on strike who, you don't have thousands of people who are natural troublemakers, right?
That's corporate disobedience, yeah.
Right? And so those people, I think the way that happens is people go through a process where at the end they still feel like, I'm not a troublemaker and I'm not a loudmouth and I'm not a criminal. What I am is a reasonable person who has been pushed to the wall, who has tried everything else, and I see this is what we have to do.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at it and say film, and you've got something like Norma Ray, like she starts out as being the unlikely person who's going to do this, and you watch an evolution through a variety of stages where eventually she gets up and does it. Or, something like Dead Poet Society where, Captain, my captain.
It's true, kind of although the obvious problem with
it's
either of those films,
yeah.
and I don't criticize them, this is just the nature of Hollywood, what you do in 90 minutes of film, is it often boils down to the idea that you have a romantic moment where one very charismatic, articulate person makes the perfect speech, and then, there's the great and glorious march to victory or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's very tempting for a lot of people to think that the way movements get built is just by speaking truth to power. That if you name things exactly as they are and you really nail the analysis, then like the scales fall off everybody's eyes and the movement gets born. And that doesn't happen.
Nonsense, huh? Yeah.
I wish it was true, but no, it's nonsense.
It's the rare case. It's a very rare case.
I don't know that it's any case,
ever
but
happened.
maybe it's the rare case at best.
Ever happened. So it's about the ground. It's about that field work, the groundwork to make it happen. If I'm understanding you correct.
Yeah, and I think it's about kind of picking the right fight, that matches what, there's a million things that are messed up in the world, and we're not going to change all of them. And so part of it is picking a fight that the people who are here, in Eugene or wherever place here is for other people, are actually engaged in. I mean, I also think the temptation to say what we're going to be is a movement of purists that declares our position on everything from sugary soft drinks in schools to the occupation of Afghanistan to whatever is pointless, because you don't generate any power that way. It's like, okay.
So it's picking something and convincing people to set aside. So, for example, I know people who think the Palestinian movement is the most important thing on the planet. Okay? And there's other people who say, no, it's single-payer health care. And there's other people who say, no, it's climate change. And there's other people who say, no, it's preparing for the effects of peak oil. And there's another group that says, no, it's this, and no, it's this, and no, it's this, and no, it's this. And what we're really talking about is getting those people to say, okay, as little groups spread out, we're banging our heads against power in small numbers. We're not doing much. So what we have to do is to convince all of those little individuals to set their passion, their thing aside for a little bit, so that we can win this thing, and then take the group and take the skills and take everything else that we've built in the process of winning something, and then apply it to those areas. Does that make sense?
I think that's exactly right. And there are, nothing against anyone, right? There are people who want to take positions and everything. I also know that there are a lot of people who are, who have an idea either about how they want to live or how they think change happens, which is basically, let's be, whatever the phrase is, right? Let's be the change we want to see or something, which often is a kind of, in my view, is a kind of dropout rather than contesting with power. Okay, I'm gonna live simply, and I have a lot of respect for those people. It's a good thing they're doing, but I don't think it's a strategy for changing something other than how they live. Like the people, the big corporations that are running things will allow a chunk of people to, okay, you can live over there in the margins of power and do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't get in the way of what we're doing. And I don't mean, I say that kind of in a dismissive tone, but I don't mean to be dismissive to people who make that choice. It's a serious and honorable choice to make, but I think it's different from saying we actually want to force the people in power to change something in the way that they're operating. And to do that, I think what you said is exactly right, which is you have to pick, especially if you think, look, what Occupy was very big last year, then the winter came, and the police repression and coordinated police raids in 18 or 20 cities around the country to evict people came. So now it's the spring again. Okay, so suppose you say realistically, it's April whatever it is, 14th, and maybe things are going to die out again by Thanksgiving. So you have 6 or 7 months. What's going to happen in 6 or 7 months? So I feel like you said. For me personally, environmentalism has never been I come out of the labor movement, right? That's not the burning thing for me. Yeah. But I live here in Eugene, and if the consensus in Eugene was, here's a thing about a certain kind of timber practices or something about the environment or dumping toxics into the lake, and this is the thing that everybody wants to do, or that the critical mass of people want to do, I'd be like, okay, fine, that's what I'm going to do. Not because it's my personal top thing, but because that's where we're actually going to get something done. Otherwise, what am I going to do? I'm going to sit and tell people my opinions and write little op-eds in the paper? Okay, fine. I don't need a movement to do that. But that's at best personally satisfying, but it's not power.
Right. Power is when you actually win, when you get it done, when you get whatever the goal is.
Yeah, and we're playing out of a hole, right? Yeah. The playing field is very heavily stacked against us. So to take on any one of these things with the goal not of making a statement but actually winning something is really daunting, and you have to be really serious about it.
And I think that there's another factor, which is deal locally, because if you're trying to do something nationally, it requires that you coordinate with people all over the country. Whereas if you pick an item that you can win locally, then your organizing becomes much more manageable, because now you're not trying to organize an entire nation. You're just this one little area right here. We need to start bringing people in. So How do we do that?
I think that's probably true given the reality of how different Occupy groups are organized, but it's not, theoretically, if all the Occupy groups in the country said, we're going to focus on Bank of America in 2012.
But that's a big if.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I think that's not happening, right?
Yeah.
You could do that. I think, it has to be bite-sized. It has to be something that is not crazy to take on, that you could win, or you could win at least some, because if, for everybody, winning, even partially winning, energizes people.
Exactly.
And helps build the movement.
And it adds skills, because if you get people in motion doing things, they gain skills. They gain the ability to talk to other people. They learn the material. They network with other people. They learn how to work in a group. And all those other things, learn how to write a press release, learn how to, generate, press, learn how to do all of these other things. Now, all of a sudden, you've won something, and you have this big pool of people looking for the next thing to do. Mm-hmm. And that's how you build a movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, I think the first thing is that what I think would make sense is for people here to agree on the principle that we have to focus on one or at most two things and not on seven things.
That's a tough sell in Occupy, but maybe we can go there.
Well, I can't force. You're interviewing me. I'm telling you what I think, right? If it's a tough sell, for me, I just feel like the alternative is to not have power.
Yeah.
The alternative is to be a discussion group,
mm-hmm.
or a kind of solidarity support group. Okay, we'll send 15 people out to say this about this issue, and we'll have 20 people over here, and that's not bad, but it's not going to win.
No.
So to me, the first step is to have a general strategic principle that we have to focus on something. Mm-hmm. It may be hard to agree to that. I'm sure it's even harder to agree on what that thing should be, and not because people are stuck up or egotistical, right? There are people for whom not having homes or not having health insurance is obviously the totally dominating thing in their lives. And I know for somebody like that to say, what we're going to focus on is people who are well enough off to be paying on underwater mortgages.
Yeah.
Right? To own a house, to have bought a house, to still be paying their mortgage, but to be paying too much.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a certain matrix of where can we grow? Mm-hmm. What is an issue that will actually draw more people in? Mm-hmm. What is an issue that is, morally important? What's an issue that the people currently involved think is important enough to devote themselves to? And there's a certain amount of triangulation, figuring out what the right thing is. But I think that, to me, the way to revive Occupy, I would think, is to say we can only pick one or two. Mm-hmm. We need to have a serious plan for taking on serious power, and I think that has to involve, nonviolent civil disobedience, not for the sake of the tactic, not as a style question or something, but just because of the reality is that the kind of forces that people want to confront are not going to change from something less, or not going to change from petitions, or not going to change from city council resolutions, or not going to change
but petitions and city council resolutions are tactics along the way.
That's right.
You have to do them.
I agree.
You have to do them.
I agree.
But they're not the end result.
You're saying, what is the big thing that we need to think about creating, right? I think you already have enough experience to know ultimately you have to get here because just this part has been done to death.
I have a favorite pet project that I put my proposal in. There's this process that's been going on, as you know, you were part of it. Started by Lauren Regan, who I have said publicly many times should be sainted for everything that she's done, and not only that, but just being enormously even-tempered. In other words, I've seen her blow up a little bit, but a blow up for her is not that bad. But the thing is that she started this process where she's looking at saying, okay, we've got to focus in on one or two things. I have my personal favorite, which I submitted our proposal for. And so do you have just out of interest, if you got to be king of the world and had your favorite one, what would you propose for Occupy? The thing that we should do in the next 6 months that's going to allow us to win, build a movement, and have a significant impact?
I mean, I don't. To be honest, I feel like it's not a. And I'm not trying to evade the question, but I feel like it really does. The answer to that, to me, really would matter, based on how many people were actually drawn to a certain issue. Because for me to say, I don't think it works. I don't think you can plan just by saying, imagine there's nobody in the world but Gordon. What's the issue that I would like? And then let me see if I can convince everybody to take that on, right? You've got to start with where are people actually at? So, my sense, and I could be wrong, my sense is if it was some combination of insisting on housing for people who don't have homes, and then either a moratorium on foreclosures or a moratorium on paying on underwater mortgages, I think those two things, conceptually can go together. The target of them in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases is the same, especially if the answer to homelessness is occupying properties that are owned by those same banks, which not always, but could be. I think it rings true to a lot of people. I think dealing with home evictions speaks to a lot of people who are not political. I think a lot of people who probably were not involved at all in any of the Occupy stuff last year, and speaks to one of the fundamental things going on in America, which is the driving, which is being now in the first generation of people who correctly expect to do worse than their parents on average, right? That the idea of being able to, work hard and do whatever you do and get to the point where you have a secure place to live is. So I don't know. So that's, for me, thinking about it, something like that would involve the right. But if other people, if the critical mass of people says no, it should be getting toxics out of the lake or something else,
You're on board. Give me a movement, any movement.
Well, no, it's not quite that. It's that I believe in the importance of concentrating on one or two things in order to have. If you said, okay, Gordon, you can go shoot off your mouth about 10 different things, or you can be part of this thing which is not on your top 10, but where there's a chance to actually make a difference. Okay, then that's what I would do. I'm
on board with that too. And it's interesting that you brought up housing as the key, because that's where I'm looking. Is we have two problems. Number one, we have a big pool of homeless people who don't have a place to be, and we have a big pool of people that are being made homeless by the system. And so the issue is housing. Okay, how do you keep those people in their houses, and how do you take those people who are on the streets and put them into a better situation, whether it be conventional housing or some kind of a place where simply the police won't evict them, won't come in and sweep the area. And then the public works shows up, and all the tents and everything, all their worldly possessions are now in a dumpster, and they're back out on the street with zero going to. At a certain level, it's insane because St. Vincent de Paul gives them a sleeping bag, okay, and they're getting some money from the city, and then the police, who are of course getting money from the city, come and take the sleeping bag away from them, and then they go back to St. Vincent de Paul and get another sleeping bag. So it's like, come on, folks, we have this problem about spending money, creating and destroying. I mean, wake up, So that's my feeling is a combination of those two, just like you expressed, and I would love to see that. I think it's an issue that we can win, that we've already cracked pretty heavily over the past few months with the task force, and even now you've got our three city councilors who are opposed to it are backpedaling pretty seriously. So I think there's the movement to actually house people around here. But okay, so once we decide on one of them, whatever it is, and of course everybody's. See, at the moment I'm advocating for one. I put in my thing, and on the 24th I have to get up and give my talk about why my idea is the best, and it's as good as any other one. I think it's the one we can win, and so I advocate for it. Because some of the other proposals that I've seen, I don't think we can win. It requires coordination nationwide, which we do not have the ability to do. We can coordinate locally, but not nationwide, and so. The thing that's a threshold for me is local as our thing. Other thoughts? I put you on the spot, don't
Other
I?
thoughts? I don't. To what? What's the
Okay,
question?
so once we accept that we have a campaign, a goal, whatever that may be, let's for the moment say it's housing. Okay. Because depending on what it is, it will change the nature of the campaign somewhat. But let's say it's housing. Okay. Now what do we do? What's the next step? We've made our decision.
Well, to some extent, I mean, let's say the one part of that goal is you want to stop evictions. You want to say no more evictions. So, some of it is there's a certain amount of research to do, right? Which is to get the list of all the people who are, plausibly coming up to a danger of eviction.
Yep.
Start talking to those people, right? Those people, I assume plenty of those people are all over the map politically, may or may not want to have anything to do with Occupy, may feel ashamed and want to slink out of town and not call more attention to them. I mean, all the normal range of things, right? And kind of need to figure out a few correct places to make a stand. I mean, it gets very tactical, right? You need to figure out where the map is. You need to figure out who it is that's evicting them. I mean, obviously, at a moment, it's the sheriff or something, but behind that is usually a bank, right? And so we want to figure out both a home defense of people who are about to be evicted, at the same time pressure on the city to not do that, and pressure on the bank to back off, right? And then you've got to think about, well, what does that mean, pressure on the bank, right? If it's 25 people in front of their office for 2 hours one morning and then you go away,
that's not much pressure.
That's not very much pressure, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, and then if you win, right, you have to keep building, right? If you win one, right, then you got to publicize that like crazy and hopefully start drawing in more people who may have gone from thinking, there's no way I'm going to avoid eviction. I feel bad. I don't want to call attention to myself. I'm leaving town. To feel like, oh, well, maybe there's a chance. Maybe I should talk to these people. Maybe I'll stay and fight it.
Yeah. I mean, as you talk about that, the thought comes to mind. Have you seen the Michael Moore's film Sicko?
No, I have. I intend to, but have not.
Got to see it. It's a good film, and it's one of the where you can actually laugh about an incredibly bad situation. But one of the things that he talks about in there is he has this guy who has a website and who's been attacking Michael Moore. I mean, it is this website that's just vicious and whatever coming at him. And what happened was the guy who ran it got to the point where he couldn't do it anymore because his wife had cancer. And the insurance company isn't paying. Okay? In other words, they had health insurance and the insurance company said, no, we're not covering all this stuff. And so all of a sudden he can't run his website anymore. And so Michael Moore writes him a check for $12,000, anonymous check. So he can be on the air attacking Michael Moore. Okay? So it's kind of like we have these people who are going to be evicted who hate Occupy. Okay? So at a certain level, we have to say, okay, well, how do we get people to realize that Occupy is actually your friend? So in this particular situation.
Well, I think there's probably many people who are in danger of being evicted.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen. I mentioned to you, I saw the number on underwater mortgages, which is about over 7,000 in Lane County.
Yep.
Right. So I'm sure among all of those people that there are plenty of people who would, or there's enough people who would welcome help in trying to fight off an eviction.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding
so
is that
you have to start with that and talk to other people and explain what the program is, and some people will move closer.
Yeah, the number I heard was 7,200 were likely to be foreclosed on in the coming year, which is people underwater, and that there's 5,900. What is it? 5,975 that are already up for auction. So that's 12,000 homes.
That's a lot of.
That's 12,000 homes in Lane County for people who either have lost it or are about to lose it over a period of a couple of years, which winds up, I mean, with a population. Let's see, Eugene's got a population of 157,000. So if you assume 3 people per house, which is probably a low number, that means you're looking roughly 50,000 houses, and for more than a tenth of them to already be on auction. I mean, that's a frightening statistic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
That's right.
I mean, I think that it's bad enough that people who are even opposed to us can start to wake up on an issue of that nature. So, and realize that maybe Occupy isn't the enemy.
Well, I think that we have to. I think one of the things that happened last year is that obviously Occupy caught everybody by surprise, right? The mainstream media, which is all corporate owned,
right,
does not, tries very hard to not report on things like this, and ended up reporting on things. And it took a while. It took a couple of months until they got their machinery into gear to try to convince everybody in the country that Occupy is a bunch of dirty, scraggly, illegitimate window bashers or whatever their line was.
Dirty hippies.
Right?
Get a job.
So now they're there already, right? They're not going to be caught by surprise again.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that's important is to not let it be a fight over are you pro or con the Occupy movement, right?
Which is something that's being framed. I mean, we can see that framing occurring right now in the editorial pages in the Register Guard.
Right. So I think for protest movements, what is important is always to keep the focus on the enemy in a way, or on the target, right? The question is not, are you pro or con the Occupy movement? The question is, are you pro or con the practice of banks that end up with evicting people from houses? And if you want to say, I'm not part of the Occupy movement, I'm not like that, I'm going to call myself Homeowners for Justice, and we'll march alongside them, but I'm not going to be, well, what do I care? Okay, fine.
Yeah, I'm fine with losing the Occupy brand if it goes away.
What matters is not... Okay. I mean, I have tremendous respect for people involved in Occupy, and I don't want to disrespect those people. But I feel like what matters is building a movement to actually change the practice that is going on. And when they try to make it as if the only way for you to act against what banks are doing to the community is to identify yourself as a dirty hippie, that's what they want people to think, right? Yeah. And it's not true that the movement is dirty hippies, or maybe some, but that's not what it is. But it's also not true that that's the right choice. That's what they want to make it, and we need to keep the focus on what are the banks doing and what are the big corporations doing to people in the community.
Totally. Okay, so we've got our campaign.
Yeah.
Okay, we're starting to put a little pressure on the bank. We're starting to stand up in front of houses for foreclosure and the rest. And street theater is probably an aspect of that. Civil disobedience is an aspect. But my question is reaching out into a larger community. Suggestions on how to do that, how to build your political base, how to get more people to say, this makes sense. These guys are right, and we ought to be tagging along.
Well, partly I think I'm a very strong believer that people get organized around things to do, and not just around facts or stories.
God, I love it when people agree with me.
Things. Okay, so I don't know exactly what the right thing is to do. But this is just all like theoretical. Suppose everybody said, okay, we want to focus on Bank of America. No more foreclosures by Bank of America. Okay. I believe Bank of America has paid no taxes. That they're one of the companies that paid zero in taxes for the last few years. Well, if you went to suppose you could calculate. Suppose you said everybody in Lane County on average is paying an extra $200 a year for services in Oregon because Bank of America is not paying its taxes, and that's what their share would be. I have no idea what the real numbers are. And you said, okay, we're going to start a parallel campaign, which is a pledge that everybody is withholding $200 from their taxes, that we're not going to give Bank of America their subsidy until they stop foreclosing on our neighbors. I mean, I don't know. We need to. But
I like that one.
But
that works for me.
I think the thing is, when you want to say we want to get it broader, I mean, part of it is talking to people. Part of it is what do you need people to do, and part of it is thinking of multiple ways to pressure corporations into doing the right thing, and multiple things for people to do. To go out to people and just talk to them, I think is, it's useful, but it's not. It doesn't really it doesn't really crystallize the issue. The issue gets much more crystallized when you come to me and say, hey, Gordon, I want you to do this. And then I'm like, any doubts I have, or I come immediately to the surface? I don't know about that. What about this? I'm not sure about your movement. I'm not sure, whatever, right? Things come to the surface that need to come to the surface to be talked about.
Yep.
And then when people start doing it, A, then it's useful, and B, then they feel more ownership and more engagement, and it's kind of a much better opportunity to educate people around and ask for them to participate in something.
Precisely. You have to put out the request. And so how do you put out that request to a lot of people who simply wouldn't come to an Occupy event? In other words, they're not going to show up at a General Assembly. They're not going to show up at these other things. How do you get, because if we got 150,000 people in Eugene, okay, we've got the biggest event that we had was 2,000 people, which means that 98.7% of the people in Eugene, okay, were not there. And there's a range of reasons why they were not there that go all the way from they hate us to they couldn't get a babysitter. And so along that continuum, how do we go about moving those people over to, hey, this is the most important thing, I'm bringing my kid with me and we're showing up? How do you do that?
I don't think there's any shortcut around person-to-person, face-to-face conversations, right? Which means you need to start thinking, okay, we want 20,000 more people involved. Where might they plausibly come from? If I think, okay, some might come from these church groups, some might come from this apartment complex, some might come from all the people who hang out at this bar. I don't know. Well, then somebody has to go out to those places and start talking to people. I don't think it happens by email. I don't think it happens by websites. I don't think it happens even by viral videos. I mean, not to discount those, but, those can be very galvanizing for a moment, right? But for one thing, you're not just talking about, the kind of thing that you're talking about, I think, is not just having one moment of excitement, even where you get 2,000 people out. It's having growing a movement over a sustained period of time, because you're not going to win something like this by one, even if you had one big demonstration, right? So I think people have to be talked to face-to-face, which means building a much bigger network of people who are out there doing that in different parts of the community. And there are, there's a lot of different organizations and places where people are already organized, right? They're already talking to each other, and so it's a slow process, and a lot of people would rather do anything but that. But that is the single most important thing.
Anything but that. We're there. I'm totally with you. I actually ran for office back in 1984, and that summer I personally knocked on 8,000 doors. And a lot of face-to-face. In other words, exactly what you and I are doing right now is to set the hours and go and do it. You get a little bit of a hit. I mean, it's the face-to-face that really does it. But you can get a hit by talking to the Rotary Club, or talking to the Kiwanis, or talking to a church group, or talking to this. Those are all important things, but it comes right down to having enough boots on the street. Okay, knocking on doors so that eventually you're talking to everybody in the community.
And I think that, one thing I think is important for people to remember is that there's a lot of people who try to make the people who are involved in Occupy or supportive of Occupy feel like they're the marginal freaks, right? And the truth is, a majority of the country supports the goals of Occupy. It did from the beginning to the end. I don't know that a majority of the country now, after all the negative press, would say, we support the Occupy movement. But if you say, do you think there should be caps on Wall Street executive pay? Do you think people shouldn't be forced out of their homes because of the banks? Do you think Fortune 500 companies should not be able to pay zero in taxes? A bunch of different things like that. There's very, very strong majority support. This is not the... This is in terms of the goals, in terms of the things we're trying to get done, this is a majority support. This is not... So, again, I think when you go out and have those conversations, you need first to have picked what's your one or two things and what is it that you're asking to do. You go out and have conversations and say, we want you to support Occupy, or just we want you to come to a meeting with no agenda, or we want you to sign a 10-point manifesto of everything in the world. I don't think that's going to work.
No. Not. And when you stop and think about it, it's not just, you gave like 3 or 4 examples, okay? It's not just 3 or 4, it's like hundreds. and if not hundreds, thousands. Dumping toxic waste. It's Citizens United, unlimited money in campaigns. It's this, 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 and it just goes on and on. And one of the interesting things is when you go out to talk, person to person, you've got a goal, but at the same time you can also sneak in, the thing that you like to talk about. I mean, that's perfectly okay in a conversation. You don't have to stay on the subject all the time. So if your passion is single-payer health care, and you've got somebody there, we're working on this campaign and we're trying to talk to people and blah, 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 and then you say, well, I mean, come on. The homeless thing, people being foreclosed on, that's kind of exactly like single payer. Let me tell you what's going on with that one. I mean, it's like it's out of this long list. I mean, that you agree with us. We agree. Mm-hmm. And you get to talk about whatever you want. And the object is to just say we're on the same page and we need to change. We need to fix this. What's your, and something that's enormously powerful is simply ask the person that you're talking to, what presses your button? What's important for you? What do you think the problems are in the society? And talk about that.
Yeah, I feel like yes and no. I mean, I'm all for open conversation and finding out what people care about, but I don't think that you can. I think it's very easy for a conversation like that to end up being a kind of implicit, like, oh yeah, and we're gonna act on your thing too.
No,
right?
You don't make that promise.
Today
we're doing this.
If the truth is, here's what we're trying to do, then when I show up at your door, what I'm saying is, I want to talk to you about this thing that we're trying to do and that we want you to participate in. Yeah. It's not that I'm against, single payer or something like that, but this is really what it's about, and I'm not going to pretend that if you say to me, oh yeah, and the thing that I'm working about is animal welfare rights, will you sign my petition? And, okay, I'll sign your petition, but I'm not gonna be disingenuous and feel like, oh yeah, and we're also a movement for that. No, we're doing this. If we decided we're doing a thing, then we're doing a thing. Mm-hmm. I think.
Well, we've got that aspect, but there is sort of the kind of Dale Carnegie, if you remember him, approach that that listening is probably as much a selling tactic as talking, or it actually is not as much as it's more. In other words, if you go there and engage someone and let them talk, let them tell you, okay, then it's the conversation where all you do is listen, okay, and the person walks away saying, whoa, that person, that was really intelligent. And do you follow what I'm saying? In other words, listening is very powerful by itself.
I think listening is very powerful too, but I mean, Dale Carnegie was selling something. We're not salespeople. Mm-hmm. And I think that that listening is important, but being straight with people is important too.
Absolutely.
Both about what we're doing and about what we're asking them to do.
I'm not advocating manipulation.
I know. I'm just.
But same thing.
But I think I guess what I think, and some of the conversations I've had with some people in Occupy, right? There's a temptation to say, you have the conversation how it's really important to focus on one or two things. And everybody wants to fudge it. Not everybody, right? It's tempting to say, oh yeah, absolutely, we'll focus on one or two things, but we can always talk about these other 7 things too.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you can't
so
really.
Maybe
focus really means focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
For now. And so
okay.
Maybe next year we'll do the other thing, right? But,
So in other words, in your conversation, you have to keep bringing it back.
Well, the goal is to build a bunch of people who are doing a particular thing, right? The goal is not... I mean, you could have a long-term goal of building a general political consensus around something. That's fine. That's good. But really, you have to have a campaign that's focused on achieving whatever it is that the movement decided to focus on.
Mm-hmm. So we've got about another 4 minutes to go. So
yeah.
a lot of things. We covered a fair amount of ground. It's been an interesting discussion. I'm sort of thinking we should continue it and do another hour. But so things that you might want to add that we haven't touched on. I think I mentioned to you before we started that I spent a couple of years working in the U.S. Congress in 2009 and 2010, and like many people went to Washington near the beginning of in the first year of the Obama administration, in the hope that it was a time when more progressive things could happen, and I was plenty cynical before going, but.
even more so to see the extent to which even the Democrats are so beholden to corporate money. I mean, in the 2010 elections, labor unions, which is the primary political player on behalf of working people, were outspent 13-1 by corporations, and even Democrats took 10 times as much money from corporations as from unions.
Yep.
And so, to the extent that, I guess to me, it became very clear that we can't look, unfortunately, that we can't look to elected officials, certainly at the federal level, to lead the charge on this. People will sometimes make good speeches, or people will make a little bit of attacks. Oh, we should have the Buffett rule and stuff like that. But if you're running for Congress, not even for Senate, if you're running for House of Representatives and you have a contested election, you have to raise maybe $2 million every 2 years. Right? There's only one place that's going to come from. You're not going to get $2 million from like $5 contributions here and there, right? You're basically going to get $2 million from wealthy individuals and from corporations. And so that all of the, I guess this is, I think this is part of what was energizing about Occupy, was saying, no, we're not, this is not a movement to go have a petition to Congress. This is a movement to go directly at the people who are in power, behind the people who are paying the Congress people to carry out their wishes.
Yes.
So, I guess that having spent time working in D.C., and not to say, there were some very good people who I met in the Congress who are working very hard to do good things, but at the system-wide level, I think that it really made sense for Occupy to be focused on, we want to take direct action towards the banks or whatever it is, as opposed to saying we're an electoral organization. And now, especially in 2012, an election year, there's a lot of pressure to say, well, all that energy that was in Occupy should really just go into electoral politics. And everybody's free to do what they want, but I think that would be a mistake. I think part of the power of Occupy was saying, essentially, we're going to go around electoral politics directly at the economic powers behind the elected officials.
Well, we're about to run out of time, but one thing is probably in Oregon, we're doing, or at least in this area, we're doing a little bit better than average in terms of the quality of our representation. But it is, there is considerable room for improvement. But we've only got about 16 seconds left, so one quick final thought?
No, I mean, I agree that certainly at the local level, the elected officials have been more, certainly more hopeful than at the federal level. And if the point of the whole thing is to make things better, what can be won through city council or whatever is good to win. I think the big things to really take on the banks are not going to happen that way, and are going to happen in direct action. Okay.
And with that, thank you for tuning in for yet one more episode of Occupy TV, and we'll be back next time.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's